Picture this. August 479 BC. 1 year after Thermopylae. The morning sun rises over the plains of Plataea in Boeotia, and standing on a ridge overlooking the battlefield is a man who should never have been given this command. Pausanias, nephew of the legendary Leonidas, regent for a boy king too young to rule, stares across the Esopus River at 100,000 Persian warriors who have come to finish what they started. The mathematics are brutal. For every Greek soldier breathing in the pre-dawn air, nearly 3 Persian warriors wait on the opposite bank. But here's what the Persian commander Mardonius doesn't know yet. Those Greeks aren't just fighting for territory or glory. They're fighting for something far more dangerous. Vengeance. 1 year ago, 300 Spartans died at Thermopylae. Their king, Leonidas, was beheaded. His body mutilated. His head mounted on a spike for the Persian army to mock. Now, 10,000 of his countrymen have marched north carrying that image burned into their minds. Before we dive into this forgotten story of the greatest revenge in ancient history, if you're fascinated by battles that change civilization, hit that like button and subscribe. And comment below to let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible that we're exploring this ancient battlefield together from across the world, connected by our curiosity about the past. The wound was still fresh. Still bleeding. Thermopylae wasn't just a military defeat. It was a national humiliation that cut deeper than any sword. When news reached Sparta that Leonidas and his 300 had fallen, that their bodies had been desecrated, something changed in the Spartan psyche. The city-state that prided itself on discipline and emotional control became consumed with a singular purpose. Make the Persians pay in blood. But revenge required more than rage. It required the impossible. After Thermopylae fell in August 480 BC, the Persian juggernaut rolled south unopposed. King Xerxes himself led 200,000 warriors through Greece like a scythe through wheat. Athens was evacuated, then burned. The Acropolis, sacred heart of Greek civilization, was reduced to smoking rubble. Every temple, every statue, every symbol of Hellenic culture that stood in the Persian path was systematically destroyed. The message was clear. Submit or be erased from history. Yet something miraculous happened at Salamis. In September 480 BCE, the Greek naval fleet, cornered in the narrow straits, achieved the unthinkable. They annihilated Xerxes' massive navy in waters so choked with Persian corpses that sailors couldn't row without hitting bodies. The great king, watching his fleet burn from a golden throne on the shore, made a decision that would define the next year. He would return to Persia with most of his army. But he would leave behind his finest general, Mardonius, with 100,000 elite troops to finish the conquest. This is where the story becomes extraordinary. Mardonius wasn't some incompetent bureaucrat playing soldier. He was 50 years old, a veteran of campaigns across 3 continents, the man who had conquered Thrace and Macedonia for Persia. His tactical mind had broken armies from Egypt to India. The force he commanded represented the cream of the Persian military machine. 50,000 Persian infantry, trained from childhood in the spear and bow. 10,000 cavalry, including the legendary immortals who had never tasted defeat. 40,000 Greek allies from Thebes and other northern city-states who had chosen Persian gold over Greek freedom. This wasn't an occupation force. This was an extermination army. Through the winter of 480 to 479 BCE, Mardonius made Athens his headquarters. But his real strategic masterstroke was psychological warfare. He sent envoys to the Greek alliance offering terms that should have been irresistible. Athens would be rebuilt at Persian expense. Greek city-states could keep their autonomy under Persian protection. All they had to do was kneel, offer earth and water, acknowledge Xerxes as the king of kings. The Athenians, standing in the ruins of their city, faced a choice that would echo through history. Their leader Aristides, called the Just for his reputation for fairness, addressed the assembly with words that still burn across 2,500 years. As long as the sun holds its course in the sky, we will never make terms with Xerxes. We will fight him without ceasing, trusting in the gods and heroes who defend Greece. But words don't win wars. Athens needed Sparta. And Sparta was hesitating. Here's what the chronicles barely mention about those desperate winter months. Sparta was terrified. Not of dying, that's what Spartans did best, but of leaving their homeland undefended. The Peloponnese, the southern peninsula where Sparta controlled vast territories, could be defended at the Isthmus of Corinth, a narrow strip of land barely 4 miles wide. Spartan military doctrine screamed one thing: fortify the isthmus. Let the Persians have northern Greece. Protect what matters. But Pausanias understood something the other Spartan commanders didn't. Thermopylae's lesson wasn't that brave stands were futile. It was that Greece could only survive united. If Athens fell permanently to Persia, if the northern city-states remained under Persian control, Sparta would eventually face 200,000 enemies alone with no allies, no buffer states, no hope. In the spring of 479 BCE, Pausanias made his move. At 31 years old, he was young for such command. But he carried the blood of the Aegeid dynasty, the line that claimed descent from Heracles himself. More importantly, he carried the memory of his uncle Leonidas bleeding out at Thermopylae. The debate in the Spartan War Council was brutal. Conservative voices argued for defensive positions. Pausanias argued for the unthinkable. March north with the largest Spartan army ever assembled outside the Peloponnese. Meet the Persians on their chosen ground. Destroy them so completely that Persia would never again threaten Greece. The vote was close. But Pausanias had one advantage. He was regent for Pleistarchus, Leonidas' son, the boy king who couldn't yet rule. When Pausanias spoke, he spoke with the authority of the Aegeid line. And every Spartan in that council chamber remembered what the Persians had done to the last Aegeid king who faced them. In July 479 BCE, an army began assembling that defied every principle of Greek warfare. 5,000 Spartiate hoplites, every full citizen warrior Sparta could muster. 5,000 perioikoi, the free non-citizens who fought alongside the Spartans. 35,000 helots, the enslaved population who served as armed attendants, 7 for each Spartiate. This was unprecedented. Sparta was marching to war with 45,000 men, fully 3/5 of their entire military capacity. They were betting everything on a single campaign. As the Spartan contingent marched north, something remarkable happened. City-state after city-state joined the column. Athens sent 8,000 hoplites under Aristides. Corinth contributed 5,000. Megara added 3,000. Smaller cities like Tegea, Plataea, and Sicyon sent their entire military forces. By the time this army crossed into Boeotia in early August, it numbered 38,700 hoplites and perhaps 70,000 light infantry. It was the largest Greek army ever assembled. But here's what makes this moment truly extraordinary. These weren't just soldiers. They were walking symbols of every Greek city-state that had suffered under Persian invasion. Every man in that column had a personal reason to be there. Athenians whose homes had been burned. Plataeans whose city had been razed. Megarians whose farms had been pillaged. And at the center, those 10,000 Spartans and perioikoi who remembered exactly what the Persians had done to their king. The march to Plataea took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of dust, heat, and growing tension as scouts brought reports of Mardonius' positions. The Persian general had chosen his ground carefully. He'd built a massive fortified camp on the north bank of the Esopus River, near Plataea. The position was brilliant. Open plains perfect for cavalry. The river providing a defensive barrier. Supply lines running back to Thebes, where the pro-Persian Greeks could provide food and reinforcements. Mardonius had even constructed a wooden stockade, a square fortification over a mile on each side, as a fallback position. This wasn't a mobile army. This was a siege force preparing for a long campaign. When the Greek army arrived in late July, Pausanias made the first of many decisions that would prove his tactical genius. He refused to give Mardonius the battle the Persian wanted. Instead of advancing onto the plains where 10,000 Persian cavalry would slaughter his infantry, Pausanias positioned his forces in the broken, rocky terrain near the foothills of Mount Cithaeron. The two armies stared at each other across the Esopus River for 11 days. 11 days of growing tension as both commanders waited for the other to make a fatal mistake. Mardonius sent his cavalry to harass Greek positions. Pausanias held firm, refusing to be drawn onto open ground. Both sides knew the stakes. This wasn't about capturing territory. This was about annihilation. One army would leave this battlefield. The other would be destroyed so completely that the war would end here. Here's what the ancient sources barely explain about those 11 days. Pausanias was setting a trap. Every night, his engineers were surveying the terrain, identifying ravines, studying water sources, mapping escape routes. The Greeks looked passive, almost frightened. In reality, they were preparing for a tactical masterstroke that would revolutionize ancient warfare. On the 8th day of the standoff, Mardonius made his move. His cavalry, 10,000 strong, attacked the Greek supply convoys coming through the mountain passes. They slaughtered the baggage train, cutting off food supplies. Then they did something even more devastating. They destroyed the Gargaphia spring, the main water source for the Greek army. The message was clear. Surrender or die of thirst. That night, August 26, 479 BC, Pausanias called his commanders together for a council of war. The Athenian general Aristides spoke first. Our men are dying of thirst. We must retreat to find water. The Megarian commander agreed. Without supplies, we'll be too weak to fight within days. But Pausanias saw something no one else did. An opportunity. Here's what makes Pausanias one of history's most underrated tactical geniuses. He ordered a night retreat. But it wasn't really a retreat. It was bait. The plan was complex, risky, and required perfect coordination. The Greek center would fall back toward Plataea, toward the springs at the base of Mount Cithaeron. The Athenians on the left wing would retreat simultaneously. But the Spartans and Tegeans on the right wing, they would lag behind. Deliberately. Creating the illusion of a disorganized, panicked withdrawal. Pausanias was gambling that Mardonius would see exactly what he wanted to see. Greeks in full retreat. The perfect moment to attack and destroy them. The withdrawal began at midnight. And immediately, everything went wrong. The Greek center, consisting of contingents from smaller city-states, began their movement but got confused in the darkness. Instead of stopping at the planned position, they marched too far, ending up at the Temple of Hera, nearly a mile beyond where they were supposed to be. The Athenians started their movement but found themselves cut off by the displaced center. The entire left wing couldn't retreat properly. And then there was Amampharidas, a Spartan battalion commander who refused to move. Amampharidas stood before Pausanias and declared that retreat was cowardice. Spartans don't run from barbarians. His entire lochos, roughly 600 men, sat down and refused orders. Pausanias faced a crisis that would have broken most commanders. His carefully planned withdrawal was disintegrating. Different Greek contingents were scattered across several miles of terrain. The Spartans were divided. And dawn was coming. When the sun rose on August 27, 479 BCE, the Greek army looked exactly like what Mardonius had been praying for. Scattered. Disorganized. Vulnerable. Across the Esopus River, Persian officers were practically trembling with excitement. The Greeks were in full retreat. Their supply lines were cut. Their water sources destroyed. Their formation broken. This was the moment to end the war. Mardonius gave the order his cavalry had been waiting for. Pursue and destroy. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next 2,500 years. As the Persian cavalry thundered across the river, expecting to find panicked Greeks fleeing in terror, they instead discovered something that would haunt their survivors forever. Discipline. The scattered Greek forces weren't fleeing. They were redeploying. Every contingent, despite the chaotic night movement, was reforming into battle lines with mechanical precision. And there, on the right wing, where Amampharidas had refused to retreat, stood 11,500 Spartan and Tegean hoplites in perfect phalanx formation. They hadn't retreated at all. They'd been waiting. Mardonius realized his mistake too late. He'd committed his entire army to an attack across the river, onto ground he hadn't properly scouted, against an enemy that had just revealed it wasn't retreating at all. It was choosing its battlefield. The Persian commander did the only thing he could. He ordered full assault. The finest troops in the world, the immortals, the elite Persian infantry, would crush the Greek right wing before they could fully form up. The cavalry would sweep around the flanks. The Greek allies from Thebes would pin down the Athenians. Simple, brutal, effective. Except for one problem. Mardonius had never faced Spartans who were fighting for vengeance. The Persian cavalry struck first, waves of mounted archers sending arrows darkening the sky like locust swarms. Greek shields, 3 feet wide, locked together forming walls of bronze that the arrow storms broke against like waves on rock. The sound was indescribable. Thousands of arrow impacts creating a continuous thunder that drowned out screams and war cries. Horses wheeled and charged. Spartans stood motionless as statues, their shields forming an unbroken wall, their long spears a bristling hedge of death. Every cavalry charge broke against Greek discipline. Horses impaled themselves on spear points. Riders fell into the killing zone where Greek second ranks finished them with short swords. For 2 hours, the slaughter continued. Persian cavalry, the unit that had destroyed every enemy they'd faced, couldn't break through. Then Mardonius committed his infantry. 50,000 Persian foot soldiers, the finest in Asia, advanced across the river in massive formations. They carried wicker shields, light and maneuverable. They wore leather armor, practical for the heat. They'd conquered from Egypt to India with these formations. But they'd never fought hoplites. The collision when it came was like earthquakes meeting. Persian infantry struck the Spartan phalanx at full speed. The front ranks simply ceased to exist. Greek spears, 8 feet long, punched through leather and flesh with mechanical efficiency. Persian wicker shields, designed for arrow defense, shattered against bronze-faced shields weighing 20 pounds each. The Greeks didn't fight like other armies. They didn't rely on individual heroics or tactical flexibility. They were a single organism. 8 ranks deep. The front rank striking with spears. The second rank supporting over their shoulders. The rear ranks pushing forward with their shields, adding mass and momentum to the formation. Persian officers screamed orders to their men. Use your archery. Flank them. Break their formation. But the Spartans had trained for this exact scenario since childhood. They'd been taught to fight in the phalanx from age 7. Every man knew his place. Every shield overlapped with his neighbors. Every step was synchronized. The battle became a grinding nightmare for the Persians. They were better individual fighters, more flexible tacticians. But against a phalanx on solid ground, individual skill meant nothing. It was machine versus mob, discipline versus courage. And discipline was winning. But then everything changed. Mardonius himself, watching his elite infantry being butchered, made a decision that sealed his fate. He would lead the charge personally. The Persian general, wearing his distinctive white tunic and riding a pure white horse, rallied 1,000 of his best troops. The household guard, men who'd served him for years, who would die before letting him fall. They charged straight at the Spartan center, targeting the position where Pausanias fought. For a few terrible minutes, it looked like the Persian general's personal courage might turn the tide. His guard fought like demons, pressing the Spartans back step by step. The formation held, but barely. Pausanias himself was wounded, blood streaming from cuts on his arm and leg. The Spartan lines bent under the pressure. But they didn't break. And then a Spartan hoplite named Nestus did something that would echo through history. He picked up a rock. Not a spear, not a sword. A rock from the battlefield floor. And he hurled it with every ounce of strength his training had given him. The rock struck Mardonius in the head. The Persian general fell from his white horse, dead before he hit the ground. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then the Persian army realized what had happened. Their commander was dead, killed by a thrown rock like a common criminal, not even granted the honor of dying by the blade. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Persian morale shattered like glass. Units that had been fighting with discipline seconds before began edging backward. Officers shouted contradictory orders. The carefully coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. And that's when Pausanias unleashed hell. He ordered the general advance. Every Greek contingent, from the Spartans on the right to the Athenians on the left, charged forward simultaneously. The Greeks who had appeared disorganized and scattered just hours before now moved like a single fist closing around Persian throats. The Athenians who'd been pinned down by the Theban Greeks suddenly found themselves fighting fellow Greeks who had lost their will to die for Persian gold. The Thebans broke, fled toward their city walls, leaving the Persian left flank completely exposed. In the center, the smaller Greek contingents that had gotten lost during the night retreat now appeared exactly where they needed to be. Fresh troops joining the slaughter, surrounding Persian units that had committed too deeply to the attack. But the real killing happened at the Persian camp. Mardonius had built that massive square stockade as a fallback position. Now, as his army retreated in panic, it became a death trap. Thousands of Persian soldiers fled to the camp, thinking the wooden walls would provide safety. The Spartans arrived first. But Spartans weren't siege experts. They trained to fight in the Phalanx, not scale walls. So they waited. Specifically, they waited for the Athenians. The Athenians, who'd learned siegecraft from defending their own city, knew exactly how to breach fortifications. The Tegeans, lighter infantry who could move quickly, were the first to reach the walls and find weak points. Then the Athenians arrived and coordinated the assault. What happened inside that Persian camp defies description. The sources are clear about one thing. It was a massacre, not a battle. Persian soldiers, trapped inside wooden walls with no room to form battle lines, were butchered by Greek hoplites who'd spent 11 days thinking about what they would do when they got this chance. Remember, these Greeks weren't just fighting a military campaign. They were exacting vengeance for burned cities, destroyed temples, and mutilated kings. Herodotus, writing just 50 years after the battle, claimed only 3,000 Persians survived the fighting at the camp. Modern historians suggest that number might represent prisoners taken, with more managing to escape. But even conservative estimates put Persian casualties at over 50,000 dead. More than half of Mardonius' army. Gone in a single afternoon. The Greek losses? Around 1,500 killed. The mathematics of annihilation had reversed. The Spartans, specifically, had lost only 91 men. 91. Out of 10,000 who'd marched north seeking vengeance for their king. They'd just participated in the most lopsided victory in ancient warfare. But here's where the story transcends military history and becomes something deeper. After the battle, as Greek soldiers moved through the carnage collecting spoils, a delegation approached Pausanias. They carried the mutilated body of a Persian officer they'd found in the camp. A man named Lampon of Aegina made a suggestion that would test whether the Greeks had become the monsters they'd been fighting. Pausanias, he said, you should take Mardonius' body. Behead him. Impale his head on a spike. Exactly as the Persians did to your uncle Leonidas at Thermopylae. The other Greeks fell silent. They'd been thinking the same thing. Vengeance demanded blood for blood. Humiliation for humiliation. The entire Greek army waited to see what Pausanias would do. The young Spartan commander looked at Lampon for a long moment. Then he spoke words that would define Greek civilization's difference from Persian tyranny. When Leonidas died, Pausanias said he died as a Spartan king following the laws of his city. The Persians dishonored themselves by mutilating his body. We will not dishonor ourselves by imitating their barbarism. Mardonius fought as a warrior and died as a warrior. His body will be treated with respect. The decision stunned everyone present. This wasn't mercy. This was something more profound. Pausanias was drawing a line in history. Greeks weren't fighting to become Persians. They were fighting to remain Greeks. The body of Mardonius was buried with honors. No mutilation. No desecration. In one decision, Pausanias had avenged his uncle not by copying Persian cruelty but by showing that Greeks could win without becoming barbaric. But the material spoils were staggering. Mardonius' camp contained treasures accumulated through years of conquest. Gold by the ton. Silk from the east. Spices worth fortunes. Weapons and armor crafted in the finest workshops of Persia. Individual Greek soldiers found themselves suddenly wealthy. The 91 Spartans who died? Their families would be supported by war spoils for generations. The victory at Plataea triggered consequences that rippled across centuries. Within hours, news of the Greek triumph reached other battlefields. On the same day, possibly even at the same hour, the Greek fleet destroyed what remained of the Persian navy at Mycale in Asia Minor. 2 complete Persian forces annihilated simultaneously. The message to Xerxes was clear. Your empire has been broken. The psychological impact on Persia was devastating. The King of Kings, who'd claimed to command the divine favor of Ahura Mazda, had watched his 2 largest military forces destroyed in a single day. The myth of Persian invincibility died at Plataea. For Greece, the victory meant survival. Athens could be rebuilt. The Acropolis would rise again, this time with the Parthenon standing as proof that Greek civilization hadn't just survived, it had triumphed. The golden age of Athens, the era of Pericles, Socrates, and Plato, was only possible because 10,000 Spartans marched north in 479 BCE seeking revenge. But there's a darker coda to this story that the ancient sources reveal. Pausanias, the brilliant commander who'd achieved the impossible, couldn't handle peace. In the years after Plataea, he became increasingly arrogant. He began wearing Persian clothes, adopting Persian customs. Rumors spread that he was negotiating with Xerxes, offering to betray Greece for wealth and power. In 477 BCE, just 2 years after his greatest triumph, Pausanias was recalled to Sparta, tried for treason, and eventually starved to death in a temple where he'd taken sanctuary. His tragic fall reminds us that sometimes the men who win wars aren't suited for the peace that follows. The battle itself entered mythology almost immediately. The site at Plataea became sacred ground. Annual sacrifices were offered to honor the fallen. The cities that fought there erected monuments. The Spartans built a tomb for their 91 dead that would be maintained for centuries. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was psychological. Before Plataea, Greeks saw themselves as divided city-states with nothing in common beyond language. After Plataea, they'd seen what they could achieve united. That unity wouldn't last. Within 50 years, Athens and Sparta would be at each other's throats in the Peloponnesian War. But the memory of standing together against impossible odds, of avenging Thermopylae's fallen, never faded. Modern military academies still study Plataea. Not for the tactics, though Pausanias' strategic maneuvering was brilliant, but for what it teaches about motivation. Those 10,000 Spartans didn't fight harder than the Persians because they were better warriors. They fought harder because they knew exactly why they were there. Every spear thrust was for Leonidas. Every shield wall was for the 300. Every Persian who fell was payment on a debt of blood. That's the power of purpose. The Persian Empire would recover from Plataea, but it would never again threaten mainland Greece. The border between East and West had been drawn in blood. Greek civilization survived, flourished, eventually conquered the Persian Empire entirely under Alexander the Great 150 years later. And it all traces back to that August morning in 479 BCE when an untested commander led an army of vengeful Greeks onto a battlefield where they should have died. Should have, but didn't. So what do we take from this? The Battle of Plataea teaches us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior numbers or resources but from knowing exactly what you're fighting for. Those Spartans weren't professional soldiers following orders. They were sons avenging fathers. Brothers avenging brothers. A nation repaying a debt of honor. Mardonius commanded 100,000 warriors. But Pausanias commanded 38,000 men who'd seen their king's head on a spike and decided that nothing, not the greatest empire on earth, not overwhelming odds, not even death itself, would stop them from making that right. That's the difference between an army and a cause. Between soldiers and avengers. Between fighting for conquest and fighting for something that matters more than survival. History remembers Thermopylae. 300 Spartans making a last stand that still echoes through the ages. But history should remember Plataea just as loudly. 10,000 Spartans who didn't die standing. They died winning, taking 50,000 enemies with them, breaking the Persian Empire's back, saving Western civilization, and showing the world that sometimes, just sometimes, vengeance doesn't corrupt. Sometimes it clarifies. Sometimes it focuses everything you are into a single point of absolute purpose. And when that happens, when a whole army channels their grief and rage into disciplined violence, even empires break. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most decisive battles, please hit that like button. It helps this video reach more history enthusiasts like yourself. And subscribe because I've got more forgotten battles that changed the world. Comment below and tell me, do you think Pausanias made the right choice refusing to mutilate Mardonius' body? Was that honor or weakness? I'm genuinely curious what you think. The Greeks proved something at Plataea that the modern world sometimes forgets. That being willing to die for what matters is powerful. But being willing to win for what matters, that's civilization. That's what separates us from the empires we fight. The Persians fought for conquest. The Greeks fought for something deeper. For their families sleeping behind city walls. For the memories of brothers who died at Thermopylae. For the right to remain free men rather than become subjects of a distant king. And in the end, on a blood-soaked field near a small town that nobody remembers, they won. Not just a battle, but the war. The future. The right to build the civilization that would eventually become the foundation of the Western world. All because 10,000 Spartans remembered what the Persians had done to their king. And made them pay for it in a currency the ancient world understood. Blood. And absolute, total victory.